Greg Drevenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest today is Forrest Hobbs. If you've listened to episodes 46, 48, and 50, our three-part interview with Dave Scott about his trials and tribulations on the TransAmerica Trail, then I think you'll enjoy this episode. Hobbs also completed a solo trip on the TransAmerica Trail, but he took a very different approach than Dave Scott. Hobbs lives in Denver, Colorado, and he bought a 1200cc Yamaha Super Ténéré adventure bike, rode it 2,000 miles to Nags Head, North Carolina, rode the entire 6,200 miles of Sam Correro's TransAmerica Trail, added a couple thousand miles along the way to visit friends and family, and then rode from Port Ord, Oregon back home. Over 73 days, he logged over 12,000 miles. Hobbs also took a purist approach. He used only roll charts for navigation and didn't even have a GPS as a backup. He also camped on the trail nearly every night. I really enjoyed my conversation with Hobbs, and we have some commonalities. We're both from the South, we're both 49 years old, and we both started riding motorcycles late in life. But whereas I'm mostly a street rider who occasionally rides off-road, riding dirt bikes is Hobbs's passion. He has competed in the Baja 1000, the Red Bull Romaniacs Hard Enduro, and the Idaho City 100 ISDE qualifier. And not just once, he did all three races twice. His plan was to make the TransAmerica Trail as challenging as possible to test himself, to break himself down mentally and physically, and he prevailed. Stay tuned for another episode about adventure and testing one's limits. Good morning, Forrest. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Greg. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is great. So I'm in California. You're in Denver, Colorado.
Yes, sir.
And you had contacted me because you had listened to the three rather long freewheeling episodes with Dave Scott about his experience on the TransAmerica Trail.
Yes, sir.
You've ridden the TransAmerica Trail yourself, and you had a quite different experience. You bring a different background to it, and I think it would be kind of a nice counterpoint. You know, Dave had various challenges. If people want to listen to those, that's episodes like 46, 48, and 50. Dave was dealing with challenges during the pandemic. He was sort of had some limitations in terms of preparation. He was like you, he rode solo, and that brings its own challenges. But I think you took a very different approach. And I'd first like to kind of start with, you know, Dave had some off-road riding experience, but it's pretty limited. He's kind of like me. He's more of a street rider. And I think most of his dirt riding experience had been when he was younger. But I'd like you to sort of set up how you prepared basically your riding experience prepared you for the TransAmerica Trail. So give us a little bit of background.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Once again, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. I started riding later in life. I always wanted to ride as a kid. I've always liked bicycles, cycling. I used to be into BMX when I was a kid and road cycling. I moved to Colorado to race mountain bikes in the mid 90s, cross country. And, you know, I've always liked the outdoors and stuff like that. And finally, when I was about 30 years old, I got my first dirt bike, YZ125 two-stroke motocross bike, and started riding motocross in some trails. And ever since then, it's been pretty full bore on the dirt bikes. It's just something I really love. And so, you know, I've done some pretty hard races like the Baja 1000 twice and the Red Bull Romaniacs twice, Idaho City 100 qualifier for the ISDE, and you know, things of that nature. And I was reading on a website some comments or something a year or so ago, and I came across the TransAmerican Trail. I hadn't really known about it, and it really just piqued my interest. And I thought I could bring together a lot of my skills of just camping and the outdoors and riding and the love of nature and photography and things like that, and kind of synthesize them or bring them all together with the TAT. So I thought the TAT would demand a lot of things from me. And, you know, I just want to see America.
So the TransAmerica Trail, I'd like a little bit of background. So I know that you followed Sam Correro's route.
Yes.
I know there's some variations and so forth. And this is a route that Sam Correro developed, I think, mostly through the 80s. I don't know when it was fully mapped out. But you took you know, again, when we interviewed Dave Scott, he did it on a KTM 500 EXC, and he did it using, I think he had some maps, roll charts, but he mostly used GPS tracks and followed a GPS. But it sounds like you took much more of a purist approach and you went strictly with a roll chart. So for people that aren't familiar with what a roll chart is, how is a roll chart used for navigation on a route?
Well, the roll chart started for the way that enduro is an off-road race, like a trail riding race. And the old enduro format used to be what's called a timekeeper. And in the timekeepers, they use these roll charts, and it was a way to basically stay on time on the course because they had certain parameters you have to meet. And then on this one, it's basically an piece of adding machine paper. And, it's probably about 8 feet long for 300 miles or so. And, the whole Transamerican Trail that I did with the Atlantic Ocean Spur and the Pacific Ocean Spur is like 6,200 miles. So, every 250, 300, you got to reload. But anyways, it's basically each direction's about 1 inch in height, and you have a little clear view thing with rollers, and you just keep rolling it past. And, every inch is just another direction, and every direction could be 0.1 miles up to 18 miles. And then it'll give you direction of the next intersection, whether it's a T or Y or a cross. And so it's just like 1.2 T left, 1.1 Y right, 3.1. And then at every direction, you have to reset the odometer. So it's, 1 mile reset, 2 mile reset, 3 mile reset, 0.1.
Wow. So it's essentially a long scroll that has turn by turn directions. If anybody's ever looked on a Google Maps thing, if you printed out the turn by turn directions or something. So that's essentially what it is. And when you reset your odometer, do you have a separate odometer, or are you just using the trip meter on your motorcycle typically?
Trip meter on my motorcycle, and on the Super Ténéré that I use, you have to hit it 4 times. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 reset.
Right.
You can't just hit it.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and I'm always moving too. So it's like you have to, as you're moving, you're reaching up with one hand and, making the turn so you can get an accurate reset right at the intersections where you need to make it.
Right. Wow. So I know that some, rally races, I mean, that's how they used to do the Dakar years ago. And I don't know, they still do roll charts with the Dakar. I mean, I know they have electronic, but they have it as a backup. And I think some rallies still require just roll charts,
I think you're right.
Yeah.
So very primitive.
Right. So Forrest, you mentioned that Sam Correro's TransAmerica Trail essentially from the Atlantic to the Pacific is roughly 6,200 miles. But from what you had told me before the interview, you rode a total of 12,000 miles, so almost, about twice the length. So you're in Denver. Tell us how you got up to 12,000 miles on this trip.
Well, most people, when they ride the TAT, they transport their bike to the beginning in Nags Head, North Carolina. So they might rent a U-Haul or something like that and put their bike on a truck and transport it one way, start the TAT. And then a lot of times they'll ship their bike back from Port Ord, Oregon. And I don't know. I just wanted to do the transfer. And that's part of why I chose the Yamaha Super Ténéré, was to do all the extra road miles that I knew I was going to do. So I took it from Denver to Nags Head, North Carolina, and just roaded on the interstate, basically the 2,100 miles fully loaded to Nags Head to start. And then from Port Orford, Oregon, it was, another 1,500 miles or so back to Denver. And then a buddy of mine, Brent, his son Bly, was in the Loretta Lynn's amateur national motocross race, which was near the TAT. That race is near Nashville at Loretta Lynn's ranch in Hurricane Mills, Tennessee. And so I did the 450-mile transfer from Tellico Plains. I peeled off the TAT and went to watch the motocross races for the nationals for about 5 days. And then I went back to Tellico Plains. So that took 1,000 miles or so. And then there's 3,500 or so for the transfers, and maybe another 1,000 miles for mechanicals and detours and things like that. I also went to Atlanta and visited my family because the TAT goes through the northwest part of Georgia as well.
Right. So, 12,000 miles, at least half or more of that was off-road. So you mentioned some mechanical. So I'm just kind of curious about some details because, a lot of people have, maybe have heard of the TAT and maybe they want to ride a section of it. Very few people probably have the time or inclination to do the whole thing like you have done. But questions that come to my mind are like tires. Like you rode 2,100 miles on the interstate to even start the TAT on the Atlantic coast. Did you start off with some fairly knobby tires? Did you have to put on a fresh set when you got there? How many tire changes have you done? And you mentioned some mechanicals. Could you walk us through some of those kind of technical details?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for the question. I forgot the kind of tires I had going out there, just whatever came with the bike. I bought the bike last April. This is my first ADV bike. I've never had one. I haven't really had any street bikes. It's all just been straight dirt motocross and trail bikes. And so anyways, it came with a set of tires. And so I just burned those up for the 2,100 miles riding out to Nags Head, North Carolina. And then I had set it up for a shop in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. I had some tires shipped there, and just from doing a bunch of research on another website and the comments and everything, they said that specifically for the Super Ténéré, that the Shinko 804, 805s work pretty well. And so I decided just to run those for the whole ride. So from Nags Head, I made it to Rocky Mount, North Carolina at Tri-County Power Sports, and those guys were really nice to me. And they put the Shinkos on, and those tires were getting, I don't know, maybe 3,000 or so, 4,000 miles for a rear and double that for a front. And so then I had a rear tire shipped to my sister's house in Atlanta, and that was about 3,000 in, I think, after I got them in North Carolina, or 2,500. That rear was pretty burned up. And so I got a rear installed there. And then in Moab, I got a front and a rear installed, same Shinkos, and they actually had them in stock.
Nice.
And then I got a rear in Idaho, because actually on day one after Moab, I did a big day of like 320 miles. And I was going fast though. That's what I learned with this bike, is I really can't ride how I want to ride.
Yeah.
I can ride plenty fast, but it's hard on the wheels and it's hard on the tires, is what I found.
Right.
Well, I'm talking like, going over 70 miles an hour, like 65.
Yeah. I mean, you hit a rock on a gravel road or something. Cause I've actually had that experience myself on a Super Ténéré, where I dinged rims pretty bad, cause I was riding with some guys pretty fast, and there was big embedded rocks and some trails. And you hit that at a good clip. It's just, and all that mass and momentum, it's just, something's got to give.
Exactly. And I was running maximum pressure for the whole ride. So I never aired down for anything. I was running 38 in the front, 42 in the rear. Yeah. I was running rocks.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I have to say, again, I understand that there's some sections of the TAT that are, just kind of wide open gravel roads, but then there's some stuff that's pretty technical. There's some stuff that can get pretty muddy. And, you said, I agree with you. The Super Ténéré full of gas with nothing on it's pushing 600 pounds, like I said, about 580. Right. And if you've got panniers and all your gear, and you camped the whole way, you didn't stay in any motels or anything, from what you said, is that correct?
Yeah, I stayed in one motel in at the Alpine Lodge in North Carolina, just because it was really nice. And I got talking to the proprietor and whatever, and it just felt right. Yeah. And then I did 3 days in Delta, Utah, just because I was just done. Yeah. I just had to recuperate. And so I just hung, and that's after I got the tire puncture, and my plug lasted 1,300 miles about. And then in Delta, Utah, and just all that, I was just tired and beat the heat and everything. And but besides that, when I was actually on the trail, I camped every other night. So it was so
you said that you're pushing probably 700 pounds for a bike, and that is, I mean, I remember the interview with Dave, he was saying he had about a 300 pound 500 EXC, and that nobody ever wished they had a heavier bike on the TAT. So what was, and you're used to riding smaller bikes. I mean, all the off-road riding that you do. So, and you bought this bike specifically for this trip. So I imagine you had a lot of adaptation to do to get used to such a big.
Oh my God. Oh my God. It was, I mean, I'm a pretty good rider off-road and at motocross. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm a good rider. I'm strong. I'm fit. I got this, no big deal. It's just dirt roads. And wow. Yeah. Wow. All I can say is I've ridden a lot and, dirt bikes and plenty of long days. And, but just having that much material under you, 680 pounds or whatever, it's a lot of bike. I mean, I'm 6'2", and it's still a lot of bike. And it really, it's way different, I think, than riding something that's like 500 pounds or whatever. It just, even if you're riding it correct, it just takes more because it's so much bike.
Well, I mean, it's interesting is that, adventure bike sales have done, they've been like the real bright spot in the motorcycle industry over the past decade. If anybody pays attention to the industry, everybody's got a full range of adventure bikes with all kinds of technology, and they got middleweights and they got open class bikes, and you can get 1300 cc's or 800 cc's or 650s. And so there's a zillion of them out there, but they're big motorcycles relative to a KTM dual sport or a like you said, a motocross bike. I mean, those things can weigh 250 pounds, a little bit more or less, but riding a big motorcycle is physically demanding. It's tiring.
Oh my God. I underestimated it completely.
Yeah. Well,
I'm an expert, I got this, no big deal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something I think for people to think. I mean, there are certainly people who buy adventure bikes and do what you did and enjoy it. And some people go around the world, but a lot of people buy them. I think they are aspirational vehicles as much as anything else. It's kind of like buying a Jeep Rubicon that you may or may not take off road, but they're comfortable bikes actually just for street riding, which is what I really enjoy them. But what off-road riding I own a KTM 690 Enduro. I own it because it's lighter than most adventure bikes, and I'd rather have a lighter bike that may be a little bit less comfortable on the road because I'm not putting a lot of paved miles on those trips. But I trailered it out to Moab, for example, to do the white rim trails and other stuff. But big adventure bikes, they're not just physically demanding, but I don't know if you had any incidents, but that much mass and momentum, something starts to go a little bit out of shape. It goes quick and it's hard to recover.
I can't tell you. I mean, this bike, like, I'm good at riding in the sand and the silt and the mud. Yeah. This bike was just terrible in those conditions. It just, once, even going 20 miles an hour, you have to get down like 15 miles an hour to ride that stuff, just because when the front end starts wallowing, the back end, all the weight in the back, all my gear and stuff, the back overwhelms the front and starts pushing the front end and augering it. And then it's just sketchy. So I couldn't ride like normal. I couldn't ride aggressive. And another thing with this bike, I think the Super Ténéré, mine's a 2012. It had like 14,500 miles when I got it. I put 1,000 road miles on it. And then bam, I went and did the tat. And it makes a fair amount. I know bikes now make up to 150 horse or whatever, but still 95 is a lot. And guys say it's nothing or whatever, but I tell you, it's something. And the motor on this bike can easily overwhelm the braking capacity of the bike. And so that's what you got to, you have fun and start pinning it. And then all of a sudden you got no brakes, and then the ABS starts being choppy on the gravel surfaces and stuff. So it constantly have to be vigilant, use a lot of judgment, because it's just so easy to get in trouble on a bike like this. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I just went. Over the weekend prior to this interview, I was in Portugal for the KTM 890 Adventure.
Oh, nice!
And so, it was. So it's interesting because that's the launch was for their base model, and they have the R model, which is their more off-road oriented model. Really, the only difference is like the tires, the front fork. The seat, a few other things. I mean, the same basic platform, and they made the standard model a little bit more off-road oriented. It's got a little bit more off-road oriented tires. It's got a little bit softer suspension settings. And KTM being KTM, it was not a bunny slope ride. We were like on-road, off-road, back and forth using every ride mode. But it is, again, because I don't ride off-road that often, it's like I'm always having to sort of adapt, like, okay, I'm to these different conditions. And I tried to be constantly vigilant, because even though they have electronics, I think for some people they could, and again, off-road ABS, so it has less intervention in the front, it turns it off at the rear and so forth. But in off-road modes that can, reduce either the power or adjust the throttle response, all those things are great, but you still can't overcome the physics, I guess,
that's exactly what the rear end overwhelms the front end. That's the best way I can say it.
Yeah, exactly. So it
pushes in and augers it down and makes the front dig, and then you're done.
Yeah, exactly. So
may I say a couple other things, please?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sure.
One thing is I should have changed the fluids in this bike, because they're probably the original suspension fluids, and I should have resprung it heavier for me. So she was pretty soft the whole time, which And another thing I'll say is the Super Ténéré, it's a really interesting bike in terms of when you're sitting down on gravel, it's a totally different machine than when you're standing. And I found that when I was standing, the bike was completely different on gravel. And so basically all the gravel, I mean, I basically stood all the time, 4, 5, 6 hours every day of, I usually ride like 6, 7 hours a day, maybe 8 or 9, but I just had to stand because the bike is kind of sketchy sitting.
Yeah.
And it really took its toll. I ran bigger foot pegs. That was one of the best things I did. I ran the IMS rally pegs.
Okay.
Oh my God. That was probably the best modification I made. And I'm so glad I did it because they're really big pegs and I wanted that for a big bike.
I mean, I think for what some people, again, most ADV bikes are typically set up when you buy them more for like, they're more street biased, not
right.
all of them. Again,
especially the Super Ténéré.
Yeah, exactly. With Super Ténéré,
it's not a dirt bike based bike, it's a street based.
Exactly. I mean, they're going to have 90-10 tires, and that ratio is typically meant for somebody who's going to ride 90% street, 10% off-road. So the tires are typically best for like kind of some gravel and some hard packed dirt, but not good for sand, not good for mud. And with the pegs you're talking about, traditional sort of street pegs are fairly narrow. I mean, in the sense of they don't give you a big platform to stand on. So if you're standing up all day, depending on your boots, it can really kind of make your feet more sore than they would be otherwise. And so, yeah.
Burning calves every day.
Well, I mean, that's like I said, if you were standing up 4 or 5 hours a day, that's you were obviously in shape beforehand, but I'm sure you got quite a bit of a workout on this.
I dropped 20 pounds. I was a little bit pudgy going into it at 214, and I dropped down. I dropped down to 194 at the end.
Wow.
I'm at 200 steady 2 months after, so I've kind of dropped 14. It's just sort of stayed, so it did something to me.
Right. Wow. So hey, I'm curious about some of the conditions that I heard from Dave. One of the biggest challenges he had was when he was in the southeast, particularly Mississippi. Was he encountered some water crossings and mud and so forth. What were the conditions like in some of the parts of the trail for you?
I experienced a good bit of rain in like North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. I got lucky in Mississippi. It's funny, in Mississippi, I was riding through it and a lot of it's just that red clay.
Yeah.
And it's different than Georgia where I'm from, but there's so many parts I was riding through and I was just like, oh my God, if this is wet, there's no way I can make it through on this machine. I'll just have to post up in some town for a week or whatever and wait for it to dry up and then go back about my business. And
I mean, there's a photo in the magazine in the November issue of Rider that from Dave's print story about he's just got basically that clay and mud is just caked on his knobbies, and he said it was on his boots, and he almost couldn't get himself out of it because he was by himself. He
like
didn't
glue.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, Greg, the number one challenge of this ride was heat.
Okay.
I started on July 18th, and that was like, oh yeah, the official heat wave back east, and doing the transfer out to Nags Head, North Carolina. I never had it before, and I'm pretty good in the heat. I'm from Atlanta, and I like the heat, and I got what's called heat rash and just all over my body. It kind of looked like poison ivy and it itched like poison ivy. And it actually came back in Oklahoma as well. Cause Oklahoma was like an oven.
Really?
I mean, it was just gnarly, 100 degrees, 101, 102, windy, sun, just baking.
Yeah. And humid. Yeah. So it's interesting you talk about the heat rash. I've seen that. My wife and I do some hiking, and depending on what kind of clothes you're wearing and stuff like that. So that, given how hot it was, what sort of gear were you wearing in terms of apparel?
Oh yeah, thank you. And with the pegs and the standing, I wore motocross boots for the whole trip. Garnet SG12s. Yeah, I've worn those for like 10 years. It's just all I wear. And I had on Climb Dakar pants over the boot. And then I just had a few old jerseys that are sentimental to me, and I wore those. And I wore chest gear for the half the time. It was just so hot, I quit wearing my Thor chest gear. And I actually was wearing a motocross helmet, a Fly Formula carbon helmet, and kind of wish I'd had an ADV helmet with a visor, but and I'd wear goggles and sunglasses just depending on the conditions, etc.
Right. So why is it that you wish that you sometimes had an ADV helmet with a, like I said, a face shield or
It's all the
something?
wind noise, especially on the
Yeah.
transfers and stuff. And I actually took the visor off of my motocross helmet and was running it visorless about, after Loretta Lynn's, a guy gave me a tip on that, and it was a good tip.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always got to listen.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I mean, goggles are great to keep out dust and dirt like that off road, but yeah, you're going 80 miles an hour down a freeway, it's a different experience.
It's annoying.
Yeah.
It's a learning process, whatever.
So, as you go along the TAT, I mean, like I said, for navigation, you were using a roll chart, and then you camped most of this trip. So would you just basically ride until you were kind of done? And then did you camp in campsites or campgrounds, or sometimes it was just right off the trail?
I guess I'm taking pride again. I had not one campsite.
No, really?
It was all bootleg, just, bandit camping.
Yeah.
I'm stubborn like that.
No, that's good. I mean, were there some particularly cool places that you camped in terms of scenery or conditions or something like that?
Yeah, there were definitely some cool places. In Oregon, there's one right by the road, and there's a beaver pond and stuff like that. And, even some spots out in the middle of the desert. It's, the desert can be nice, and in the woods of Oregon were some nice spots. And I mean, nothing super exceptional. It just, because a typical day for me, I didn't start super early. I'm not Mr. Morning person, but, I get up at 7:30 or 8, and I'd always try to be on the bike by 10 or something. But every day I'd pretty much ride till dark.
Yeah.
And so I just ride, and then I'd get lunch at between 11 and 2, just depending on where the next town was. Because let's remember, on the TAT, there's typically only maybe 2 stops in a whole day where you can get gas, and the rest of it, you're just out in the weeds wherever, and rural America where there's just nothing. And so I get gas and get something to eat in the middle of the day, and I didn't really carry much food with me in general. And then around 4, 5, 6, whatever, I'd hunt down dinner and get some more gas and fill up my dromedary bag with 6 liters of water, and probably punch out another hour or 2 after dinner most nights. And I'd always just try to, about an hour before dark, I just start looking.
Yeah. So you said that you started in mid-July. How long was your trip in terms of, from beginning to end, from leaving your house to getting back home and being done?
I left July 18th, and I think I got back on September 28th. So that's 73 days.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I probably had 53 or so actual TAT trail days, and the other 20 days were, I stayed with a friend in Bend, Oregon, another friend in Logan, Utah. So that was probably 5 days. I went to Atlanta for 5 days, Loretta Lynn's for 5 or 6 days, some mechanicals. So it's probably 20 days off the trail, just doing other stuff. Right.
Well, hey, like you said, you said at the beginning you wanted to see America, and so it's an opportunity to visit, friends or family that might be nearby, or see some historic sites. I know that, when Dave did it, he did this thing where he wanted to do things like, the Oregon Trail and the Santa Fe Trail, and do some of these historical things and see some historical places along the way, because he's like, well, I'm only going to do this once. That was his thing. So
right.
But so
that's another thing I'll say, Greg, is it's pretty interesting using the roll charts, because with the roll charts, you're really married to the route. Because I didn't even have a GPS unit with me. I don't own one really. So
nice.
I have my cell phone.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you had to, but interesting about that is, I mean, if you're out of, and I imagine
no service in lots of places.
Yeah, when you're especially in the Western states, when you're, I'm in that situation where if I don't usually carry a GPS, I usually at least have I have a Garmin InReach, which has a GPS and has a little map function, but it's got the oh shit button, where you can, if you get yourself in trouble somewhere and you need.
I didn't have none of that.
So. Wow. Okay. All right.
On purpose. And
you were very much a purist, so you were solo and no GPS, no emergency satellite.
I have one of those locator beacons if I got in trouble.
Yeah.
The ACR, I think it is.
Okay.
So if I really got hurt out in the middle of nowhere, I could press the button. And
right.
That was it. But
so one interesting thing about so the Super Ténéré, you've got tubeless tires on there, right?
yes, sir. And a shaft drive. And that actually I wanted the shaft drive because then there's no chain brakes, no chain maintenance, no chain changes.
Right, right. But even with, you said that you mentioned one puncture, which you can plug a tubeless tire. I mean, you got a tube, you've got to pull the tire off. It's a much more involved process. But did you just have that one puncture? Did you have other flats?
No, I had the one puncture and that's it. And it was, interestingly, it was on the first day I got brand new tires. And those Sheco 804, 805s I were running, I think they're 50/50 tires.
Yeah, yeah.
They did pretty good on the road though. They were pretty quiet and stuff. And I broke a spoke in Arkansas, and then I had to do a detour. And I think it was like Fort Wayne, Arkansas, the Yamaha shop there. They were super cool. And he hunted me down some spokes because, usually spokes are sold in full sets of 32 or 36. And there's actually 4 different links of spokes, 2 links on the right side, 2 links on the left side. So just getting the spokes not as easy as it sounds always.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not as
so they hooked me up and gave me a spoke and found me 2 spares, and I carried those, and I never broke another. Once you have spares, you're not going to break anymore.
Exactly. But you can't bring spares of everything. So you mentioned some other mechanicals. I mean, obviously you had a broken spoke. What were some other?
I had a broken spoke and a puncture, and I think that was it.
Oh, hey, I mean, like you say, I mean, for a big, heavy motorcycle that I'm sure you rode a lot harder than most other people would, and you did,
correct,
1,200 miles round trip. I mean, at least it sounded like it was a durable motorcycle. I mean, that's a good thing.
Well, it's Yamaha.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean,
am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great. I mean, that's a thing that's, that's a real world test that, I work for a magazine. We test motorcycles. We do our best to put at least 1,000 miles on a bike or something, but we just can't. We occasionally will have long-term bikes that we put closer to 5,000 or 10,000 miles on over the course of a year. But you did this over a course of a couple of months, and so so you had weight to deal with. But it's interesting. You make a good point about the shaft drive. I know that is a thing that a BMW GS has got a shaft drive. The Super Ténéré has a shaft drive. Some of the big Triumph Tigers have shaft drives, and it adds weight, but it does reduce the maintenance factor for some off-road conditions. So yeah,
and I changed my shaft oil when I changed my engine oil. I did like 3 oil changes, like every 3,000 or 4,000 miles I change the engine oil. Every other I do a filter. But if anything, I was really trying hard to protect my tires and my wheels the whole trip. And another thing about Super Ténéré is, I'm riding a 2012. It's kind of an old bike, even though the one I have, it was in basically new and mint condition when I bought it. So I basically had like a mint Super Ténéré that was just old.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Well, I'm curious, again, you got at least 6,200 miles of the TAT itself proper. So what were some of your favorite parts of the TAT in terms of riding or scenery or stuff like that?
Really is, maybe I'm just biased and going back to my homes, but Georgia and Colorado were my favorite 2 states. Georgia was really not even part of it. It was only 120 or so miles, but I really like West Virginia and Virginia too. And, that whole Blue Ridge Appalachian belt is just so beautiful. And the mountains are really big there. And, people think that I live in Colorado. I've lived here 28 years. And, the mountains here are big, but there's plenty of big mountains in Virginia and Western Virginia is just rugged.
Yeah.
And then Colorado, I really took my time through Colorado. I slowed down and probably took a couple extra days in Colorado, and it was just beautiful. And going through the Alpine Loop section and Cinnamon Pass and California Pass, and it was spectacular. I've been through plenty of Colorado, but it was just special. And coming through, while on the TAT and having been through North Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, et cetera, it was different.
Yeah. Well, again, if anybody who has listened to the previous episodes or read Dave Scott's story, he had an incident on Imogene Pass in
he broke his tib fib and had
exactly. So he had
lifed out.
He had an oh shit moment that was that actually went bad, and he broke his leg and he had to be transported off the trail. Did you have any really sketchy?
Yeah, I had one.
Yeah.
I had one big one. Well, I had a few sketchy moments riding where my front tire would slip and I almost dropped it where it would have been real bad. And,
Yeah.
whatever, got lucky, quote unquote. But the biggest moment I had, it's just, oh my God, I about killed myself. It was, well, mentally like flogging myself because it was just not the smartest. And it's probably like day 5. It was in the morning. I just gotten going and, really just getting going on the tack, pretty excited about it. Got my mind on and just going down some straight Forest Service road on the left side and hit something. And then all of a sudden I'm over in the gutter. Ooh. And the gutter is like, 12, 14 inches deep, just like a drainage channel over on the left side of the road. And then I dropped her in there. And I was like, oh God. And then it like squiggle. And I posted my right foot and and immediately I felt that stab of pain. I was like, oh God, I just did my meniscus or my ACL or something. And
yeah.
I was about to kill myself. Just like if this just ended it all, something stupid, like, yeah, I'm going to have a conniption.
And yeah, I mean, especially that early on. I mean,
that's exactly it. Yeah. Get my flow on and everything. And well, luckily nothing happened. And I said to and then I actually really looked at my suspension and I realized the forks have a spring preload and the shock has a spring preload. And since I'm kind of undersprung and everything, and then my fluids are probably junky.
Yeah.
I cranked down all the preloads. I cranked down the damping and the bike was dramatically better. Yeah. So I made the adjustments to the machine and I made the adjustments in my mind of just like, you really gotta, ride way within your limits. Cause just, one day, one little mistake, it's done. You're done.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like you said, you're out there by yourself. So, I mean, like even that little one moment of
glory, I got scared.
Well, I mean, yeah, like you want to finish, you want to get through. And so hot dogging a little bit too much or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're going to be able to do much on a 700-pound bike that's going to be anywhere near what it's like on a motocross bike. So it's not like you're going to be able to rip a big wheelie or something and be like, woohoo, and still.
Exactly.
So ride enough to like keep it exciting and engaged. But, sounds like, especially if you had an incident early on, you learned that you always got to leave a little bit of a margin of error such that, if something pops out, it comes around a corner, somebody who's also on the trail in a pickup truck taking their half right out of the middle of the road, you got to be ready for it. Otherwise it could.
I had plenty of blind corner moments, and that's just it. You want to be on the, inside or whatever, the corner is, but be on the, furthest away side. And
yeah. I know that.
And like maybe I was riding 80% and I knocked her down to, probably 70% after posting my foot there in West Virginia. So.
Yeah. I mean, I know the folks that run the Backcountry Discovery Routes organization, sure. They have a campaign and they have stickers and stuff about ride right. I mean, if you've got a two-way trail or route or something, sometimes these are Jeep roads or forest roads or whatever it may be, is stay as far to the right because you never know who you're sharing the road with and they may not do the same. Exactly. So there are a lot of people err towards the middle of a they want options right or left. But if you're coming around even at a moderate speed off road and you come around a blind corner, man, you've got to get stopped in a hurry. So,
and I got one for you. Even on the paved road, I was on like a state highway, as you hit those to connect the dirt roads, and I was coming up and over a right-hander just on a typical, double line paved road, and it was one of those insect sprayers, the one with like the 10-foot tall wheels, but they're wider than normal because they got to like the crops go underneath them and they spray. And so he was about 2 feet over the line.
Yeah.
Because he's so wide and it's a piece of farm equipment. And so I'm just kind of cruising up and over and around this right-hander and boom, there he is. But, luckily I was going kind of fast, but not crazy. And I was like, oh my God, if I'd really been pushing, I could have just nailed him.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he was in my lane and it gets his fault, but guess what? If I hit him, who pays?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right away doesn't matter if you end up hitting dirt on the ground.
If you nail something bigger than you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. So sounds like you said the Appalachians, which I've never done any off-road riding there to speak of. I know riding on the roads there, some of the mountain roads, it's just beautiful. So
Oh yeah, especially like Blue Ridge Parkway and
yeah. So the Appalachians through the Virginias and Carolinas and North Georgia. You mentioned the heat in some places, particularly in Oklahoma. Are there any sections of the TAT that you were just like, hey, I just got to get through this. I'm not really enjoying it for whatever reason.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of that. Like Mississippi, even parts of Tennessee, parts of North Carolina to start. It was just so hot. I mean, I remember meeting these guys in Colorado, and they were like in their 30s. I'm 49.
Yeah.
And they were on like, one of them was on like a Husaberg 570, that old 570, and another one had a 690 KTM. And they were like hoteling and a little camping, I think.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of people are, and which is fine. And I was like, yeah, I'm camping the whole way, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh my God, we were in the South. And there's some of those nights, there's just, it's too hot. There's no way we were camping. No way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, guess who was camping?
so
I mean, Craig, I'd get done. It'd be 7 o'clock, 7:30. It gets dark a half hour later. And I get off the bike and just be in my jersey and my climb to cars and my SG12s and just so hot, just dripping sweat, just soaked, and just like, oh my God, I wish I could just escape. I wish I could get out of my body right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when those really hot nights, did you just camp out in the open? I mean, not even pitch a tent or...
No, you have to pitch a tent because of the bugs.
Yeah, oh, right. Yeah, of course.
Well, what I did, one of the better pieces of gear that I brought was a sleeping bag liner made out of Cool Max. I think it weighs 12 ounces. And so really for the first month of the trip, I have a Western Mountaineering Versalite 10-degree bag. It's like 2 pounds. It's a really nice sleeping bag. And I didn't even use the sleeping bag for the first month. I just slept in that sleeping bag liner, and that's it.
That's smart. That's smart. Yeah. Yeah. I bet.
And then I have a big Agnes Air mattress, 6'6". It's like a pound, and a little pillow, Sea to Summit pillow. And I just not use the tarp on the tent if I knew it wasn't going to rain. I just sleep in my, it'd be basically a big mosquito net.
So what did you do to, obviously you're hot and sweaty and you're camping. I mean, did you find ponds or streams to swim in?
Every night before, when I get my dinner and my gas for the next day, I'd fill up my MSR. I got a 6-liter dromedary bag. So I'd put my 6 liters of water. I'd fill up I was running a 70-ounce, just Camelback Classic, nothing special. And I'd fill up my 70-ounce Camelback with ice water. I'd like fill it with ice and then water. And then the dromedary bag, I get 6 liters. So I'd park the bike, I'd stop, basically rip off my clothes and put my flip-flops on and hang the bag up and just use like a gallon of water to rinse off. And then I'd run some Camelback water on my head just to cool down.
That makes sense.
I mean, dude, I'd just be burning up for like an hour, 40 minutes, just.
Yeah. I mean, well, that makes sense to do a camp shower, but I know, I mean, I'm from the South, but I've lived in California since 2006. And I guess I've gotten a weaker constitution. So,
correct.
But I remember that
I can relate.
Yeah. When it's hot and humid at night, like sometimes it just doesn't really cool down that much and it just stays hot.
No, it doesn't.
I mean,
that was another thing I found. It was 11 p.m. 11 p.m. It would finally kind of break like consistently. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Like every time it kind of break, I'd be like, oh yeah, it's getting a little cooler. I'd look at my watch and there it is. Right.
So once you got out into the Rockies and stuff, did it cool off quite a bit, or did you have any cold nights?
Oh yeah, way. Even like Western Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Western, you can even see the changes, and even Western Arkansas, you start seeing some of the grasses and just some of the vegetation that's different from the South. That's kind of interesting seeing the change.
So speaking of Arkansas, the photo you sent me was taken by, what's his name? Percy Cale? Is that his name? Or
yeah. And they had that outpost there, and those guys have been there. Like, I think he inherited it from his dad or something. And it's like, they sell knickknacks and antiques. And I think that shop's been in the family for who knows, 60.
So it's kind of a TransAmerica Trail outpost, right? I mean, it's like,
yes, sir.
He's kind of caters to people that ride. Is he the one who records bikes and people in a logbook?
Yeah, he has a logbook. I signed the logbook, and he has photos. You go in the shop, it's this old 100 plus year old building. And, there's photos all around. He was such a nice guy. He was just lovely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. With meeting him, you mentioned you met a couple other guys. I mean, did you come in contact with many other TAT riders? I mean, most people go east to west. Is that correct? I mean,
yeah, you almost have to. That's what it says on the website. Sam says that you
Yeah.
basically have to go east to west, and not saying that people haven't ever done it west to east. I'm sure they have, but typically correct. And
I mean, other than the roll chart is arranged that way, is there another reason why you think it would not really work as well? I mean, like, it's sort of like people that hike the Appalachian
because
Trail.
all the turns would be backwards, even with the GPS, I think. So
I see. So it's more about an orientation of navigation than the actual conditions would be worse.
Correct.
You know,
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. I got you. Yeah.
One thing I'll say to you, Greg, is I met three different, those guys from Colorado, another guy. Well, here's a story. So the guys from Colorado on the 570 and 690 adventure, they're like in their 35 or so. And one of them's like, yeah, I'm from Ohio. And we used to do timekeeper enduros. And all the old guys always want to do the timekeepers. And none of the kids want to do them because they're complicated, which they are. It's, it's kind of nerdy. But the old guys like it because they got an advantage because they know the nerd factor. And so they can capitalize on it. And basically he said, so the old guys decided to do the TAT, and these are the timekeeper, enduro, hardcore old guys. And he said that they did roll chart with the TAT for like a week. And then they were like, screw this. This is too hard. We're not doing it.
Well, I mean, that is the old form of enduro navigation, as you're saying. So it's kind of
these guys were used to it, and they weren't having it.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, I mean, it sounds like one heck of an adventure. I mean, and you did it in a particularly, like I said, a purist format. I mean, you were solo, you did it without a GPS. I mean, you didn't even bring a GPS. It wasn't like, oh, I'll have it in my tank bag. And
there's no backup. But, Greg, I did everything for a reason. I'm a pretty methodical person. And what I learned on the trip is that to have, in my opinion, like real adventure and real fear, if you really take away the tools and the backups and you really know you don't have a backup, I think it demands more focus. I think it demands more presence because you know that your shit's on the line, your ass is on the line. And when you really know that there's kind of not a blow off valve, it forces me to be tighter with everything. Well, but then it's more pressure every day. It's more focus, which I think, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I think that, it forces you to be more resourceful, and when you are in challenging situations, whether it's the conditions of the trail, it's the weather, it's your energy level or fatigue that you're dealing with. I mean, you had said that you took a few days off the trail just to sort of recover because you're like, hey, I've been pushing pretty hard. I need to do this because if you're super fatigued,
I was just dead.
You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. So it's also having that sense of judgment about what's the appropriate speed or appropriate pace or something. And I mean, I'm one of those people that I genuinely think as humans, we need something to push against. Like, it's almost like weightlifting. They call it resistance training because it is pushing against a challenging force. Is that it's, as humans, we need that. And I mean, we are in this day and age, we are very coddled and we have a lot of comforts and convenience, which are great on some levels. But when you become overly reliant upon those comforts and conveniences, when you get out of them, then all of a sudden you're kind of lost. But it sounds like for you, you really wanted that. I mean, riding the TAT in any way, shape, or form and completing it is a challenge, clearly.
Right. But it's a very real challenge.
You wanted to take the challenge and kick it up to a higher level. You had
highest level.
Exactly. So, hey, I respect that. It's, I mean, you clearly had some challenges, some oh shit moments, but you prevailed, you persevered. So that's, how did you feel once you completed the whole thing? Did you get out of it what you hoped to get out of it?
Yes and no. It was slightly anticlimactic, but
yeah,
I expected that. So that met expectations, quite frankly. It was just probably a third of the way through, half the way through, 2/3 of the way through. I was just questioning it. I mean, I remember I punched into Colorado and I was like, oh my God, I'm, whatever. And then I'm like, shit, I got like 3,000 more miles. I'm like, it's like so far. I feel like I just ridden my ass off and I still got what left?
Yeah.
it was just overwhelming. I mean, on so many days, the hardest thing was just getting up every day and getting on the bike and just do it again, do it again, do it again. And the bike's so heavy and big and it's hot, and the bike, that 1200 makes a lot of heat too.
Sure. Yeah.
It kicks it off into me, the rider. And it just, when I got done, I was just like, man, I can't believe I fucking did it.
Yeah. Well, hey, interesting. I've not talked to many, I've only talked to you and Dave, people that have completed the TransAmerica Trail, but I've read a number of books about people that have hiked the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail. And most of them mention a similar sort of thing. At some point, you've got to confront the drudgery of it. It's almost like a monotony. Like in the case of hiking, you've just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you've got to make your miles. You're doing the same thing on a motorcycle. You're like, hey, I got to get up. I may be tired. I'm like, kind of like to take a break from this, but if I'm going to finish, I got to keep going. I got to keep pushing through it. And sometimes adventure, sometimes a trip like this, it's not always fun. And maybe a lot of it's not fun, actually.
People would always ask me, you having fun? Like, yeah. But, I didn't do it for fun.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's part of the challenge. If it were all fun, or if it were all doable, it wouldn't be a challenge. That's the whole point,
But fun or not, I will say that I love riding. And anytime being on my bike and being on the machine and feeling it and feeling the motor, and God, I love riding.
Well, hey man, and you had the opportunity to take 73 days and devote to an adventure like this. That's not something that a lot of people are able to do. They're like,
I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity. And, a lot of days I'm whining to myself about it. But at the end of the day, I'm just fortunate to have the opportunity to do it. And a lot of people can't. And there's all the more reason I had to stick to it and never quit and see it through, just because it is an opportunity, and, you got to capitalize on those. Yeah.
Well, it's like that's like that quote. I think it's from the Shawshank Redemption or something, maybe some other things where it's like, either you get busy living or get busy dying. And that is the thing about you can always go to work an extra day. You can always do that, but you'll sort of forget those days. But what you won't forget, what will really sort of define you as an individual, is the challenges that you've taken on and that you've met. And so, hey, the utmost respect, man. I appreciate you sharing your story with us. I just have kind of like one final question. Like, if anybody's contemplating or thinking about doing the TAT, do you have like a couple little takeaway suggestions that you might recommend in terms of preparation or things that you would avoid or something? I mean, it sounds like, you had a particular way you wanted to do this trip, but is there anything like kind of general tips?
Don't take a 1200.
Well, that's, like I said, I've never heard anybody say that they wish they had a bigger bike on a trip like this. So, yeah.
But seriously, like, probably take a 700 or 800 or a 650 type bike, and you need less than you think. I sent home 3 different shipments. Probably a lot of the times it was maps and roll charts too, but I probably sent home 8 pounds, 4 pounds, 8 pounds, and 10 pounds, because at the post office they weigh it and the weight's on the box. And so I probably sent home like 20 pounds of stuff total. And it wasn't like a bunch of junk necessarily, but it just, maybe I'll use this, or I'll have extra time. And there was no extra time. And all the, the pleasure book I brought, that went, the first shipment home, that thing went. There ain't no reading. I'm going to be illiterate for 73 days. And I mean,
it's funny because Dave said this.
Take less than you think you need.
Yeah, he sent home a bunch of shit. People that hike hike those long trails like the PCT, they send home shit too. They think they need, they're like, oh well, what if I need this? What if I need that? And you really kind of,
or I have that extra time on that day, and I'll wanna.
Well, you boil yourself down to really the.
I want to lie down for 3 hours and stare at the sky and do nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm exhausted.
Awesome. Hey, Forrest, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think you had one heck of an adventure. I'm envious. I hope some of our listeners are also really enjoyed listening to you share your story. Again, thanks for coming on the show, man.
And one more thing, Greg, I took a bunch of pictures with the SLR camera on the trip. Like, I'm posted up to Colorado now, but they're on Instagram. If anyone would like to see my pictures and my comments, it's FHobbs404 at FHobbs404. That's FHOBBS 404. And just a lot of like, nature pictures and
Great.
landscape pictures of people like that sort of thing. And I'm very appreciative to you. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. Hey, we'll include a link to your Instagram channel on the show notes and when we
Cool.
promote this, so that way people can just click through directly to it and check out. Because yeah, man, photos worth 1,000 words. They can really see some of what you saw along the trail. So again,
Yes,
Forrest, I really appreciate it. Have the great rest of your day.
I'm very grateful. Thank you, Greg.
Awesome. And for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstead. Keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.